Hi, everyone. Welcome to Epic. I'm Crystal with Gecko Diva, and welcome to the breeding track. Today, our session is getting started with geckos. So how to go from keeping to breeding. And my guest here today is David with Tiki's Geckos. I'm sure a lot of you will recognize David. I've seen, a lot of your videos on YouTube, and you've had quite a strong social media presence. I guess to get our session started today, why don't we start with sharing with everyone how long you've been breeding geckos and how many species, I guess, of reptiles in general that you work with?
Hey, Crystal. So I have been breeding geckos since like 2011. A little bit before that, I had a couple pairs that I bred, just like a little kid playing with his geckos. But these days we breed, gosh, I want to say like easily over like 25 different species, probably even more. I'm just throwing a number out there because we breed a lot of different geckos, we breed a lot of lizards, we breed some snakes. We have a big facility here and we breed a lot of different reptiles.
That's awesome. And I guess today, our session, what we're going to do is we're going to really focus on new cal species and on leopard geckos, species that you're really familiar with. And I think the first question everyone would really want to know when they're getting into just having that idea of, hey, I'm keeping these animals, would be really great to, maybe work on some projects, is what would you say would be like, how would someone just first get started into it? Like what was the inspiration like for, I guess I'm trying to think of the right word here. Um, like what is someone going to have to think about before starting a project? Like to pick what species to work with or what area to focus.
Yeah, so I always like to tell people that you have to work with something that you're passionate about. That comes first because it seems like common sense, but I have a lot of people that come through the doors at a reptile show or something that will see us and then they'll see the prices on the geckos, especially some of the high-end geckos, and then they start thinking like you could see it in their face, like, wait, so if I have these two geckos that are $1,000, are they gonna produce $1,000 babies? And like I'm like, wait. Like, you're already looking at it the wrong way because animals, there's just the business with animals is so different than any other business because any other business that you get into, you can have, some dry goods sitting on a shelf. You don't have to worry about it. It could go 5 months and you don't even have to look at it. But with
Yeah.
animals, we all know that's a little different. So the first thing I would say is make sure that you are passionate about the animals that you want to work with. Second thing I would say is to obviously be try to be as well informed in that species as possible. Try to make sure talk to different breeders, try to make sure you read every piece of literature that you could find, and just be well versed. Make sure that you could take care of the animal. Some species, like a crested gecko, a leopard gecko, is going to be very easy to get started. But then there are other species that, it's a little bit more delicate. So you want to make sure that
Mhm.
you're well versed. Once you do that, once you figure out the care, I would say start small. Make
Mhm.
sure it starts off as a hobby and you start to gradually increase the amount of animals that you have. One of the big mistakes I've seen people make is that they will love it. They buy 50 animals all at once, and then the next 2 years is so much work for them. They figure out, you know what, I actually don't want to do this as a job because that's what it becomes. And they end up getting out and dumping all the animals. So my best advice is once you decide the species and you're well informed on it, make sure you just start slow and gradually start to increase. There's no rush.
Yeah, and I think that's the good thing about having you start as a keeper, right? Is like you're
Yeah.
saying, really being able to get to know that species and finding out what it is that you enjoy keeping and what you want to work with before you take that next jump. And the interesting point you brought up is to start as a hobby. Do you find that like people are quick to jump in and wanting to make it a business right away? Like, can you maybe describe that difference of the steps between having a breeding business as a hobby versus an actual business?
Yeah. I mean, it's very tempting because you may have a pet gecko, crested gecko, gargle gecko or something, and you're like, this is awesome, but you don't really know if you love it until you have to do this full time, until you have to miss holidays, you have to miss hanging out with your friends and all that other good stuff because it's a lot of work. But I'm here to say that it is very worth it. If you could manage to turn it from a hobby to a business, it is just honestly one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done, just because I literally, it's kind of cliche, but I do feel like I don't have work a day in my life. Every single time I come in here, I'm working with the animals. I like it. So sometimes
Mhm.
my wife will complain because it'll be this time or even later than this, and I'm still in here just looking at animals and going through everything. But the hobby part of it is important because you start to, I feel like that's what makes you fall in love with the whole with the community and herpetoculture in general. So when you start off with a hobby and you're making some cool geckos, you're breeding them and selling them and you're making a little bit of side money, it's just so rewarding. And then from there on, you kind of start to, as your collection starts to grow as a hobbyist, you could kind of like, put two and two together and, and decide if this is something that you want to do on a larger scale. And I think that it is, I mean, when I was younger, I didn't think it was possible to make a living doing
Mhm.
this because every time I would go to a reptile show, all the guys at the reptile show would be like, doing this on the weekend, but they had real jobs and all that. And then it wasn't until I worked for a bigger reptile store that the owner had his own, he supported his family with his own store, and he had employees and they supported their families. So that opened up my eyes and said, okay, well, this doesn't just have to be a hobby. I could actually take this and make
Mhm.
a legit business in it. And whenever you're going to make that jump, you have to look at it just like that, as a business. So, of course, you still have to have some respect for the living things that we're working with, but you have to take in consideration that you're going to have to do marketing. You're going to have to cut costs. You're going to have to, make quality investments that are going to elevate your business, but also aren't going to, you know, break you, because a lot of times, because we're so passionate about it, we see something that we really want and it might be the wrong time to buy it, and you
Yeah.
could spend a lot of your capital in there. So you have to study how to, you know aside from all the studying that you have to do for your species, or the animals that you're working with, you have to study in how to manage a business, and that is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you bring up a good point that kind of ties into like the next question I have is, can you share a little bit of insight on what the expectation is on investment, whether it's time, financial, like what are people looking to expect if they're looking to make that jump of switching over from keeping to breeding?
Yeah, so it is invest. I always say, like, it's almost like you're never going to stop investing in your business, because even to this day I am still spending a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of just everything on this business. And like I said earlier, it doesn't feel like it's work or anything like that, because I love it. But at the same time, you have to realize that, especially if you already have a part-time job or something, and before you could make this a full-time job, you're going to spend some late nights. I
Hmm.
remember I mean, I've had all sorts of jobs, but when I started this out of the garage of my mom's house, and I would work, I would teach. Um, some martial arts. I would come back home, and then it'd be like midnight. It'd be 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd still be feeding geckos or getting things clean. And I would do that. I did that for years. I did
Hmm.
that for years before, we actually started. I started making enough to be able to afford employees and move out to a bigger spot. So you have to realize that if you want to do this full time, the initial time investment is going to be quite significant because you're going to you need uh so much time to put into these animals because like I said earlier, it's not just a dry good you could just put on you upload to your website and then just wait until it
Mhm.
sells. No, you might upload it to your website, but then you still got to care, feed, water that animal. So it takes
Yeah.
a significant amount of time invested. And then as far as the money goes, yeah, it also depends on the species and what quality of animal you want, of course. But what I can say, and a little piece of advice I will give to the newer breeders that may be looking to get into it, is that don't just get anything that you could afford at the moment. Try to save up to make a big purchase for some quality animals that are going to set you apart and that are going to elevate, your offspring when you start producing them, because it's always so cutting edge. Every year
Yeah.
each species is getting better and better and better. And if you say I'm going to start off with $100 gecko and you want to be a breeder, then you're going to if you start off with $100 gecko, you're probably going to produce $40 geckos,
Hmm.
right? So you have to really save up your money and don't worry about having so many geckos, but try to have this is when quality over quantity becomes, a thing. This is
Yeah.
the word you got to live by, because in the beginning you have a limited amount of time and space. So you want to make sure that you maximize that time and space with the highest quality animals you can.
Yeah. And I guess like there's something to be said about going at it slow, right? And not
Hmm.
rushing to it, and having that plan and being really honest with yourself of what you're capable of, what you have capacity wise to be able to fit into your actual situation, your life, what time you have, how much effort you can put in, how much like you do see situations where people will invest in something that they may have should have waited on instead of jumping
Yeah,
on that because it wasn't necessarily the right time to invest in that,
all the
or
time. That
you
happens all the time.
rush and then you purchase animals that are maybe like you're saying a lower end, and then you sit there and you're like, oh, I should have waited and got into a project that I would have been more excited about. um from a planning perspective, like, do you have any tips that you could share with people on like how to really kind of sit down and like, let's talk about like setup, expectation of like what you need to get started if you're looking to start breeding geckos, because it would be very different, right, from new cal to if you're looking at breeding leopard geckos, for instance.
Right. Yeah, I think that you have to understand that if you are going to be a breeder and you want to do this full time or take this as a serious business, then you have to kind of get away from the hobbyist side of things. And I'll
Hmm.
explain what I mean by that. I mean that it's not going to be very effective if you have super big enclosures with bioactive setups and all this for that's fine when you have two geckos, three geckos, four, five, six geckos, but when you start having a room full of animals like this, you could only imagine what it would be. Just something as simple as cleaning. These tub enclosures here are very lightweight, they're easy to clean, and if they fall, they're not gonna crack. There's just so many things. Like, there's so many reasons why a rack system has been proven time and time again for breeders to be the most effective thing. And you want to make sure that there is already a blueprint out there, because you see me on YouTube, you see a lot of other people on social
Hmm.
media, or even at a reptile show, you could talk to these breeders and ask how they're doing it. And there's been a blueprint. Of course, you could take somebody's blueprint and modify it and make it your own, or a little bit better, however you think. But there's a reason why all the big breeders are using racks, for example. There is a reason why all the big breeders, you know, do things a certain way. So it is important to take that into consideration when you're going to make that big jump to becoming a professional reptile breeder.
Yeah, and there's other considerations as well, right? Like, for instance, like biosecurity and
Oh yes,
husbandry, right? Like when you're looking
yes,
at getting a larger number of animals to care for, you have to make decisions on your setup and your infrastructure, your facility that is going to work best for the husbandry and the care of the animal at the end of the day.
yeah, of course.
Um, with setup, so people who are joining that are new,
Mhm.
that might be working, let's say, with new Cal and interested in maybe getting into leopard geckos or vice versa, can you maybe share some differences for people who are newer at the hobby, between setups for the species, like for a breeding perspective? Because I imagine I'm not familiar with leopard geckos, and from my understanding, there's a little bit more to the care from a heat requirement and so on. So how do the setups differ?
Right. So again, it goes back to knowing which species you want to work with. For
Hmm.
example, the new Caledonian geckos are arboreal geckos. They like to jump, so we give them more vertical space. I keep thinking it's this rack. Anyways, more vertical space, and it's really the enclosure inside, the whole volume of the enclosure is filled up. So it gives them a lot more surface area to climb around in and to hide in between and all that. And of course, these animals do not need heat. So these racks aren't set up to have heat. Now, if
Yeah.
you're doing leopard geckos are more terrestrial geckos. So they don't need to climb. They're not going to climb the walls. They're not like climbing on little branches and plants. So you don't need as much room here. You could fit a lot more tubs in a rack the same size. For every one tub that I have here, you could probably put two or three leopard gecko tubs because they don't need that height and they don't need
Hmm.
that volume space. Aside from that, the leopard geckos, you're going to need the heat cable and all that kind of stuff is something that you have to be before you figure out what you're going to mass produce. You have to be dialed in on the husbandry, and then once you do that, then you're going to be able to kind of like think about, okay, how can I make a system that I could follow, and it will be, when I say system, I mean like something that is easy to hand off to an employee for them to follow and execute properly versus something that's like super complicated. Okay, this one has isopods, so you don't have to, like you have to make
Yeah.
sure that you have a system for your program, your breeding program.
Well, and also like you're saying, like there's to consider, like if you're going for a business, then the likelihood that you're going to have people that are helping you, that you're going to have, an employee or someone that's going to help you with that husbandry, like having it's simplified or very similar across the board is going to be helpful for someone,
Exactly.
especially if when you're doing that jump, making that jump from hobbyist to, making it a business, or even if you're a hobbyist but on a larger scale and you're needing that extra help, right? Um, how about we talk about the networking piece and how important that networking piece is when you're looking to get into into breeding, because it's at this point it's not just sharing pictures of your gecko on Instagram, right?
Right.
And like now you're looking at taking additional steps because there is a whole marketing piece and networking piece to it. So why don't we kind of talk about networking?
Yeah, I think community is such a big part of our hobby, and it is something that I think that anybody that is looking to get into this world has to step outside of their comfort zone and start talking to breeders and people around you
Mhm.
that do the same thing that you want to do. And at the same time, that's going to open up doors because for so many reasons. I mean, I'll give you an example. There is a lot of the higher end gecko breeders. the best animals they produce don't even go on sale publicly. They get traded in private. So if you want to get some of their best offspring, you're gonna have to, get to know them a little bit better, and then hopefully
Mhm.
you could be let in into that little kind of like circle where they sell to you their best stuff. Another thing is that when you start to, for example, with social media, you have to start collaborate, or you should start collaborating with other people, because that's what grows your social media. That's one of the
Mhm.
things that grow your social media. So I've done a lot of collaborations with snake breeders, all sorts of gecko breeders, all sorts of tortoise breeders, everything. Because aside from the fact that we sell a lot of these species, we also want to open up our audience and not be closed-minded with the people that are going to be able to purchase an animal from us. So if I hop on a video that's going to be posted by a snake breeder, maybe then he just clicks on my profile, sees some of the geckos, and then he's interested, and that opens up a whole, different world for him. And then I'm the first guy that he sees, so he might go to me. And that's just the name of the game with any business. Like, you just want to
Mhm.
get as many eyes as on you as possible, because that is how your business will grow, and that's how, you will gain recognition. So it is very important to start to what's it called, network, and
Network,
talk to
yeah.
everybody that you can.
Well, and you see that too, very much recently as well, where there's a lot of people who are working with certain species. And I'll take a good example, ball pythons, right? Like, that's how I got my start, was with ball pythons. And then I decided to go into geckos, but you still have those old connections. And now I'm seeing other people who are ball python breeders take an interest in geckos. And then you'll see the opposite effect as well. So I think
Yeah.
it is, like you're saying, it's important not just to network with what you're working with other breeders that work with the same species, but as with the community as a whole, because there are opportunities, especially with social media, where you can collaborate and kind of help raise each other up, right? And promote each other. Um, you see that a lot at expos. So maybe
Yeah.
we can kind of tie into like the physical promotion, like when you're actually at an expo, like other opportunities to really be able to market yourself. Um, there's specific expos for like we have flora fauna. So for geckos, there's one for more designed for higher end, but there's a lot of reptile expos that focus on different species. So you want to maybe give a little bit of insight of how important expos are for people who are looking into getting to breeding. Because not everyone wants to vend at an expo, but there's differences of vending at an expo or attending an expo and so on.
Yeah. So reptile expos have been the lifeblood of our hobby for a long time, because it brings in a lot of new people, and something happens when somebody holds the animal versus watching it
Mm-hmm.
on TV or seeing it on their phone on social media. When you put a gecko in front of somebody, you let them hold it. It just there's a change that happens if they're into it, of course, and you can typically see it right away in their face, and that change whenever you give someone that little experience, all sorts of possibilities open up, because you might, aside from the very like first business transaction or whatever, you develop friendships. I can't tell you how many friendships I've developed in the hobby from reptile expos. And aside
Mm-hmm.
from the customers, there's also the reptile vendors that they everybody has something so different, that you may go to a reptile show and see an animal that you've never seen before, and then it just sparks your curiosity, and it sends you down this rabbit hole of wanting to breed another species. So it's super important, because that's, you know let's say you go to a reptile show, you see a species you never seen before, you're super interested in it, and then you have the guy that breeds them right there. You could talk to him, you could ask him questions,
So
and
many questions.
yeah, and you could get one from him if you want, and that just
Yeah.
like, that's what a lot of us in the hobby aren't just focused on one species. We may have two or three, four, in my case, hundreds of different species. So it's just like the interconnecting web that just unites us all, the reptile
Yeah.
shows.
I have to say, like, every single time I'm at an expo, I'm always, even if I'm vending, I take time and I go check other booths and see what everyone else is working with. And there's always an instance where we're like, that's really cool. I wouldn't mind, learning more about this and maybe expanding on including this into my project.
Yeah,
And I'm like, and that's
exactly.
where it starts. It catches you there. Um, and now there's even the new wave too with Palm Street, right? Where you're having
Yeah.
like online, and I like you've been really good for this because you've been having your late night, I guess Palm Street parties, and
Yeah.
and really promoting. But you're seeing a lot of new people come in that are becoming keepers, and then sticking through it and gaining more animals because now they're getting interested in the breeding piece as well, right?
Yeah.
So um what would be some, I guess, marketing strategies, I guess, some of these tools that you would like to share with people that you think are, aside from expos, that you think are really beneficial if someone's looking, like, considerations, if they're looking to jump into becoming a breeder?
So y- you should have every single social media under the sun.
Yeah.
You could start off with that. And social media is literally free marketing. You don't have to pay for it, and you could get in front of a lot of people if you do it right. So you have to understand how each social media works. You have to understand, and part of it is just understanding yourself, right? Because if you go on social media, what makes you as a social media consumer watch a video? What makes you not watch a video?
Mm-hmm.
And what interests you? What kind of videos are the ones that you want to watch? And you just ask yourself all these questions, and generally whatever answer you have for these questions, these are the same answers everybody has. So if you answer
Yeah.
your own questions and you make videos on your own questions, you start to get attention from people that have the same questions that want to watch a video, because you're going to answer, what morph is my crested gecko, right? So
Number
if you
one
ever,
question.
yeah, if you've ever wondered what morph is my crested gecko, then you gotta think, well, there's probably a whole sea of people out there that also think the same thing. So you
Yeah.
start making content around the questions that you have as a hobbyist or as a keeper. Aside from social media, of course, like we said, there's a reptile expos that you could do your marketing on. That is good too, because it's face to face, and I still think that's the best way to you know get to know your consumer base, and to have them just relate to you is meeting them face to face. Like I said, Palm Street, or like you said, actually, Palm Street is another great way. Just
Mm-hmm.
there's so many different avenues for you to be able to market your business, especially in today's age with the internet, that there's really no excuse. I really don't think that if you want to make a living out of this, and if you want to actually, like, and I mean like really want, because a lot of people say they want something, but they don't actually want it. If
Yeah.
you actually want to do this, I don't see any possible scenario where this doesn't happen for you. Because if you, everything that you fall short on is just going to serve as a mistake that you learn from, or a little something that you could take away from. So
Mm-hmm.
I really do not see anything which could stop you if you wanted to actually become a reptile breeder.
Okay. What would be some challenges, like, like when you're saying, like, there's nothing to stop you, but like from experiences and going through, having gone through the process yourself and seeing, friends and other people kind of go through that process, what would be some challenges that people should be aware of that really need to consider?
The biggest challenge you're going to have is your own mind. The biggest challenge you're going to have is yourself because you're going to give yourself 10 excuses why you shouldn't do this or why you can't do this. So once you get yourself out of the way, everything will open up and it'll be very easy. Okay? You just got to understand that for every excuse that you have to have an answer, and they will come because you're always, it's human, it's not, it's like human behavior. You start to doubt yourself, you start to think, oh, maybe I can't do this, or look at this person, they have so many beautiful geckos and I'm starting off and I have some crappy geckos or whatever.
Yeah.
It's always yourself. If you just kind of like do this objectively and say, you know what? I'm not gonna even take in consideration my negative opinions. I'm just going to set a list of things I'm going to do, and every day I'm going to do a certain list of things. You will eventually do it, and you will 90% of the work is just showing up and doing it every single day. And that's where most people
Right.
fail because they don't have the consistency or the discipline to do that.
It's mind over matter, right? And it's the same when you're seeing like negativity that's put out there too in the industry. Like one of the recurring themes that we see coming is like, oh, the industry is slower now. But if everyone keeps saying that, then everyone's going to be on that bandwagon believing it, right? As opposed to saying, there's
Let them
normal
say
ebbs
it.
and flows, but like, have a
Yeah.
plan
Look,
and work towards it.
yeah, look, I'm not gonna say that there isn't times in the economy where it's a little bit slower,
Yeah,
but you have to, again, it's just you have to say, okay, there's a problem. I'm not gonna say, oh shit, or oh snap, the problem is like, there's no way around it. You say, okay, how can I figure out the problem? How can I find the solution to the problem? So if the
exactly.
economy's slow, then you start to think of more creative ways to sell, and yeah, so it's
But it's the mindset, like you said,
it's a
right? Like
mindset. It's a
a good
mindset.
chunk of it is you as a person and being honest with yourself whether or not this is the right move or the right decision, and if so, being prepared and having that plan in place, and you know, keeping track of those. Oh, this didn't work. Let's try
Yeah,
this. And I think another one that I is a eye opener is things that are associated to care. So like it's all great that you can get all these animals, but then you have to factor in feeding
right.
your sources for, feeding and bedding. And like, are you in an area where, you need crickets, but you can't get crickets? Or, like there's a lot of different things to consider. Is there maybe some that you could share that
Yeah.
people could have like a checklist, of things that to kind of keep in mind?
Yeah, so the feeding one is really, it's an important one because obviously, like we were saying, these are living creatures, so you have to,
Mhm.
even if they don't sell, you have to feed them.
Exactly.
Unfortunately. No, but so for example, like with the geckos, it's fairly it's very low in cost to feed this many geckos. But
Mhm.
with some other species, like maybe something like a bearded dragon, for example, a bearded dragon
Mhm.
will eat your wallet away because they are very, they eat and they eat and they eat, and it's live insects, most of it. So it's just
Mhm.
like it's so constant. So you have to, same thing with, sometimes I know that with some snakes, like when
Mhm.
they're not selling and you have a big collection of snakes and the bill for the rodents keeps going up, you start to, worry a little bit. So you
Yeah.
have to take in consideration that you might have some rainy days. So I wouldn't say like spend every single cent that you make. I would always suggest putting away maybe like 20% or something, just in case accidents happen. Uh, I mean, I've had my fair share of natural disasters happen here living in Florida.
Hmm.
Just things happen which have to be taken care of immediately. So you have to have some cushion that is going to save you from that in case those days come. And they will come eventually. If you do this long enough, they will come. So start to think about the infrastructure, start to think about the feeding bill that you're going to have. Um, what else?
Yeah, and
I
be
guess,
prepared for those instances, right? Not
yeah,
kind of living it day by day, but saying,
yeah,
if we have a circumstance where, the flow is not incoming as much, that you have, like you're saying, that cushion there to be able to
yeah,
sustain the animals that you produce and that you have and that you have to care for.
yeah, exactly.
Um, you mentioned uh, natural disasters and things that are outside of your control. Can you speak a little bit to that, on that consideration? Like, there, when you have pets and you're a keeper, whether it's, a reptile keeper or you have a dog and a cat, things, it's important to kind of have that emergency plan, right? A lot of people will have a plan where, what happens if there's a fire, or what happens if there's another natural disaster? Could you maybe speak on some of those things that you have to consider if you're looking at, because going to breeding, you're going to be increasing the number of animals that you're going to have naturally, right? So maybe you can expand on that, on that situation, and like emergency plans or things to consider in that regard.
Right. So it I think it also depends on where you live. For example,
Hmm.
us here in Florida, we live in a state that gets hammered by hurricanes pretty frequently.
Hmm.
So we have to make sure that we have a lot of animals outside and in outdoor enclosures. So we have to make sure that when it's hurricane season, for example, and if we are under hurricane watch, we have to have enough space and containers to bring in all those outside animals and secure them inside the buildings, right?
Hmm.
So, again, I could speak to what I do here in Florida, but
Yeah.
every state is different. Some places you might have to worry about a snowstorm and your power going out. So I know
Yeah.
there's like people that have, either generators with a heater on, or they have like a bunch of heat packs just on standby in case they gotta like, turn them on, use the heat packs to hold over their snakes
Hmm.
until the weather gets better or the electricity comes back, I mean. So it just depends on your area. But here in Florida, of course, us getting hit by storms, well, like the big hurricanes, we have to bring in all the animals. We have to be responsible, make sure that nothing, uh, if there was some tree falling or something, it's not going
Hmm.
to wreck a cage and the animals are going to escape. We bring them inside the buildings.
I guess like in flooding and stuff like that, right? To make sure that you can act quickly, that you're in a like if ever you're in a situation. I'm thinking like in here in Canada, like I know in the States too, there's been situations with forest fires.
Yeah,
Sometimes you have to act quickly. And I think that that's something that not everyone necessarily thinks of when they first decide to embark on, getting into breeding projects and increasing the number of animals that they're responsible for, is
yeah,
what happens in this situation. Do I have enough delis or containers to be
yeah.
able, like, what's my plan for packing everybody up? Do I have enough time to do that? So these are all things I think it's important to kind of have on that list of on your plan
Yeah,
before jumping
absolutely.
into it.
Yeah, here in
Um,
here in Florida, when you have to have a permit to be able to sell live animals,
mhm.
and part of your the application process is to have a backup plan in case
Oh,
of
that's
a.
good.
It's called a disaster plan.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that brings a good point. To be well informed of what is needed if you're looking to start breeding, right? Because, like you said, some places you may require a permit. So, and there may be additional requirements on that. Not everywhere. I know for us here, I'm in Canada, um, different bylaws allow you to keep certain animals versus non. We don't need permits for breeding, but it'll be different for you, in Florida. So, can you maybe talk about some other considerations similar to that, whether it's permits or I'm trying to think of the word, like legalities, I guess, and like
Yeah.
things surrounding that.
Yeah, so again, that goes back to saying if there's a big difference between a hobbyist and a business. If you're going to do
Mhm,
this as a business, then you have to be aware that, there might be some species that are illegal to keep in your state. There might
mhm,
be some certain laws that will have you, like in our case, have a permit before we sell certain species. So you have to do your due diligence. You have to do your due diligence, make sure you know how to set up a proper, or if you don't know how to set up a proper business, then get an accountant that does, and that kind of walks you through once you start selling animals and making money, or you have a bunch of
mhm.
expenses, how to deal with all that. Because
Yeah.
again, it's not a hobby anymore. It starts to become a business, so you have to treat it as such.
Mhm,
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of states that there's particular species that are banned. For example, here in Florida, we cannot keep tegus anymore. We cannot keep green iguanas, and we cannot keep any of the big constrictor snakes. The African rock pythons, Burmese pythons,
yeah.
reticulated pythons. We cannot keep them here in Florida. So I may be on Instagram one day and look at this big anaconda and say, you know what? I want to breed anacondas. And you go buy one, and then you just realize you just broke the law, and there's no way you're going to
Surprise.
be able. Exactly. And now you're a felon, so so
Well,
you have
it's
to do your due
knowing.
diligence.
Yeah, and it's knowing, even it could be the smallest thing. Like, I'm in the outskirt of the city and we don't really have any rules around that. But if I go into the city, like things as, rear fang venomous, for instance, you can't keep, and it's like, oh, we start to think which colubrids have that, or, like kind of little
Yeah.
details like that.
Yeah.
Um, do you have some stories or can you share some mistakes that you've done earlier on that you feel like people can kind of learn from that, like some advice that you can give?
Yeah. So my advice, if you're starting a business, and you're going from hobbyist to a business, and you want to grow to a point that you could do this full time, is that you have to set a standard for how you want things to be done when you start to get employees.
Hmm.
So, because it's it's nearly impossible. I would say, I don't want to say impossible, because of course it's not impossible, but it's nearly impossible to find someone that is going to do the job as good as you want it to be done, or as
Hmm.
as to your standard, or how you used to do it. And you have to make sure that from the get-go, you let even yourself know that this
Hmm.
is how things are going to be done. We're not going to let the enclosures get this dirty. We're always
Yeah.
going to make sure we feed 4 times a week, or we're going to make sure that, on Fridays, we always replenish everybody's water bowls, for example. You just
Hmm.
have to develop a system, and you have to stick to that system. Because if you start to be very lenient, if you're lenient, then your employees are going to be even more lenient, and things start to erode. So you have to
Hmm.
constantly be checking on that. That's one of the big things that I think, because when I was younger, I started this when I was very young. So I kind of did things randomly, just because I knew they had to be done, but like my collection wasn't super big, and I was doing everything myself.
Yeah.
And it was hard for me when I started having people help me and adding people to my team. It was hard to, I didn't know how to be a leader. I didn't know how to explain everything, how I wanted it to be done. I would just assume people would do it like I did it, and it's not the case. Yeah, it's funny, but
Yeah,
it's
no,
like common.
you're like,
It,
what do you mean you didn't do it that way?
yeah, it seems like it's common sense, but especially if you have somebody that's learning about the
Hmm.
species or reptiles or whatever, there is no such thing as common sense to them. Like they need to be told exactly what to do, how to do it, and when to do it.
Hmm.
So that's my biggest advice, especially if you're looking to grow to that next step. But let's say you just want to be a one-man show and have like a
Hmm.
small business that's kind of like a side business or whatever, then I would say that my biggest advice would be uh to delegate what you can and not there's no reason why at a certain point you should be cleaning tubs, right?
Hmm.
Because your time can be better managed. You could grow your business if you use that same time that you're putting to cleaning tubs. You use that time to market the business or take pictures of animals for sale or
Hmm.
put breeding pairs together. And that time that you may not want to be a big business with so many employees, but if you have one or two people that help you part time, it's going to free
Hmm.
up your time to actually grow the business. And you could grow it up until the point that you want, and then you could stay there, but it's
Hmm.
going to make your life a lot easier. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
I see a lot of families that do it together and they have their kids involved, right? So, and I know because I'm one of them where it's like, oh, I tell my son, okay, I have these tubs I would like you to help me clean today. But that's a short term solution because
Yeah,
at the end of the
exactly.
day, they grow up and they're on to the next thing. Um, Okay, so that's awesome. I think that we've pretty much covered a lot of really good information that to help guide people onto like that right path if they're willing, like in wanting to make that step. Is there any final hot takes or comments that you want to share with people who are wanting to make that transition?
Yeah, I think I just want to, you know, r- say again that it's really just you that's stopping you. Like it's you have to be a little bit, especially if you're gonna be, you have to have thick skin. You have to have thick skin that
Hmm.
if something happens or you have a altercation with I don't want to say altercation, but if you have a bad customer or you make a
Hmm.
mistake, you have to own up to it, and you have to just develop thick skin and know that you know in the grand scheme of things, these little problems you're going to look back at and they're not going to matter much. So I think that invest in yourself, in your mind. It's not, it sounds cliche, but it really is just a mindset thing. And if you really want it, like I said, there is no way that you will not be able to obtain it, in my view,
Hmm.
at least. But that's my advice.
I think there's also something to be said in being open minded and learning from others, right? Because,
Yeah.
when you're new in it, you can learn a lot of interest, like great, valuable tips and tricks and things that you can take back and put into practice from other breeders who have been doing this a long time. And even like being open minded to more innovative stuff. There's always new products and new things that come up, like new food, new, accessories that kind of help you just be able to be better at keeping and taking care of all these animals. Um, I, I I think this has been a really good discussion. I don't have any other questions that I can think of. I think we've pretty much covered it all. So I just want to thank you very much for joining me here and sharing all this information. And hopefully it's inspired people, not scared people away to kind of make that transition, because I think it's very rewarding when you see, when you've worked that hard and you've invested and you see that egg hatch, or, and to kind of see that progress through projects that you're working with.
Yeah.
Um, it's just being well prepared and being, ready to be able to handle what's coming. Yeah, so if we don't have any other final thoughts, I want to thank everybody for joining us and watch the session. This is the end of the session. If you, I recommend everyone to go to epic.live and go and choose your next session. And I want to thank everyone for being here.
Thank you
All right,
guys. Thanks
thank
for having
you.
me.